Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is listening beyond the soundbites. Today I'm joined by Ben Kinsley, who's the Executive Director of Campaign for Vermont. Ben, welcome.
Thank you.
Ben and I have a very special announcement to make a little later on in the show, which I hope you'll be pleased about. I know I'm excited. We're excited, right?
I'm excited too.
Good answer. Anyway, but I wanted you to get to know Ben a little bit, and maybe you could talk about yourself and about Campaign for Vermont and what's been happening.
Yeah, so we're going through some exciting changes. Campaign for Vermont was founded in 2011 as a nonpartisan advocacy group. It was Tom Pelham, Bruce Listman, and Mary Alice McKenzie kind of got it off the ground and got it going. Since then we've had some changes in leadership. We had a board that was elected in 2014, in the spring of 2014, so they've kind of been leading the ship since then. And really what we're working towards is prosperity for all Vermonters. And there's a variety of ways that we look at that, social responsibility, economic sustainability, as well as, meeting our environmental obligations. There's a bunch of things that go into that kind of create, what a prosperous society looks like.
Great. And just to clarify, Bruce is no longer involved pretty much at all, right?
That's correct, yeah.
He's sort of backed away?
Yeah, he's backed away. I mean, the founding officers kind of gave up a lot of control when the board was put in place in the spring of 2014. And then Bruce quit the board when he announced that he was going to make a run.
Right.
So he has not been involved since then. And actually, we just had our last founding officer retire this fall. Tom Pelham resigned the board this fall.
So who's the chairman of your board now?
Louise McCarran is the board chair. She does a great job.
She's wonderful.
She's lots of energy, and so we've got some great board members really trying to get engaged and put forward a new vision for Vermont, which we actually put out on Friday, talking about kind of what our goals are as an organization going forward and what we're trying to accomplish.
Yes, I'd like you to talk about that in a few minutes because that was a great document. It was great. Just for full disclosure, when Campaign for Vermont was first started, I was hired to put panels together around the state of people I knew from business, from different areas, so that Bruce could facilitate the discussions about what their views are of Vermont, where we could improve things, and that was a lot of fun. I think I did that for about a year.
Yeah.
And that was really good.
It's a really cool kind of process that Campaign for Vermont has gone through, and starting out as kind of a policy think tank, a place where people can come and share ideas, and it was really started out as a statewide tour with a bunch of stops, just talking to people about what would you like to see different in our state. And it's evolved from that into what are the actual policies we need to implement, and then moving on even past that to getting on the ground and advocating for those types of policy changes.
Well, you all really started the discussion on ethics. I mean, I really credit Campaign for Vermont for starting that, and now the legislature has picked up on that discussion, and maybe you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, and ethics is one that's kind of near and dear to my heart because I started working with Campaign for Vermont back in 2013, primarily on ethics, and that was kind of my first project to get my feet wet, and worked on that, and it's really changed the discussion. I mean, at the outset of it, everyone was like, why do we need this? Why is it relevant to Vermont? The reality is we're one of 3 states in the country that doesn't have some sort of ethics legislation. And we have an almost unparalleled amount of access to public officials in Vermont. You can bump into your legislator at the grocery store or the gas station. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's transparent. Accessibility doesn't inherently mean transparency. And that's a mistake I think a lot of people make in Vermont, is the two are not the same thing. And you don't necessarily know what that legislator's financial interests are. You don't know, what kind of conflicts they might have. Just because you have a level of accessibility to them doesn't necessarily mean they're being transparent.
Do you think that's going to get back on the agenda this year?
It's definitely going to be back on the agenda. It was close last year. I wasn't as involved in that discussion this past year as I have been in previous years, but we're building a coalition. We have several groups that are on board. And there's changes in the legislature that I think are really going to open the door to some of the changes that
having worked there, I can say that I think it's needed. There are some real conflicts of interest, as we have in our, and just because it's a small state, it just happens. It's not anybody's doing anything bad or anything. It's just things you should know.
Well, it's I actually kind of ironic, but you disclose the fact that you worked with Campaign for Vermont, right? And I think that that's basically what we're asking legislators to do, right? Is say, hey, you know what? I might have a conflict here.
Right.
It's not necessarily an issue, depending on what it is, but just make sure you get it out in the open. And sunlight is always the best. That's great. The best medicine for
I think
government.
people will be surprised by some of the things that they didn't know. And it's always good to be open and honest, I think.
Exactly.
You know? So I think politics are a little in your blood. I actually saw an article. You went to Norwich.
I did.
And they interviewed you about politics and what interests you. So you've been doing this a while.
Yeah. It was interesting because I'm the only person in my family that is interested in politics at all.
Really?
I use my family as a litmus test for political awareness.
Right.
If my family knows about something, then the broader population probably knows about it because they don't really pay attention too much. So I kind of use them as my backstop a little bit, which is kind of funny. But yeah, I got interested early on. I went to Norwich for political science. I got my degree there, and it was a very policy-centric program. And so it really kind of exposed me to the world of public policy as opposed to election, politics.
Yeah.
And I realized that I had an interest there.
Good for you.
I've kind of had some really great opportunities to work in the legislature, and took advantage of them, and I've been fortunate.
That's great. Good for you. Well, that's a great school. I love Norwich.
It is a great school. I go back there all the time to watch hockey games.
Oh, do you? Oh, good for you.
Yeah.
There you go.
And it's
so this
great.
Last session, the campaign, you put out a very good questionnaire encouraging candidates to respond to you. And, of course, these are the key areas in the whole campaign anyway. The state budget, Act 46, property tax, health care, and ethics. So I don't know. I mean, those are the 5 key things.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I think everyone's pretty well aware at this point what issues the state is facing. There's not a whole lot of consensus maybe on how to solve those issues. So I think what we did is we put out a questionnaire. It was 6 questions, and we put background around each of them, which is something that not a lot of other organizations do. And really, what we offered it as is an opportunity for candidates for the legislature to share their ideas about the public policy issues that we're facing, and also an opportunity for voters to understand and become better informed about where a candidate stood on issues. So it's kind of a twofold thing. A lot of organizations put these out as an opportunity to see how their membership's issues align with the politicians' issues, and that's not how we approached it. We wanted to facilitate a discussion. We had all 3 major parties in Vermont represented, and all areas of the state represented. It was great. So we're very happy with the results.
I think that's good because when I ran, there's very few opportunities for a candidate to express their views about issues in depth.
Right.
You can, you'll be on a panel and they say, do you support this, yes or no? But there's never any time to really explain why.
Yeah, and
that's important.
It's a piece that I think is missing in a lot of ways. Is in today's world, everything's condensed down to the soundbite. Twitter is probably the worst thing that ever happened to politics.
As we know on the federal level.
Right, is trying to fit something into 140 characters is very difficult and have any context around it. So we tried to give a longer format. It was 400 words. That was the maximum that people could submit, just because we didn't have room to fit more than that.
Because I don't think any answer is ever yes or no.
No,
it's always
never.
Yes, but, or no, however. I mean, there's always something beyond the yes and no.
Yeah, and I think it's important to explain why. And we noticed some interesting things, too. Like, there are some issues that there's a lot of consensus around, and others that there was absolutely no consensus around. Things like having a forward-looking budget that looks more than a year or 2 ahead of time. So talking like 4 or 5, 6 years
like a
in
real
the future.
Company?
Actually looking into the future and figuring out what challenges you're going to need to meet. So there was a lot of support for that, and that was from very conservative-leaning individuals to very left-leaning individuals across the board. And the same thing, Act 46, there was not a lot of agreement on that, on whether it's a good, one. Right, there's a lot of different views on that.
Right.
But there was almost universal support for school choice and having the ability to choose what school you send your kids to. All but 2 of the respondents to our survey supported school choice as a concept.
Really?
Yeah. So that was really interesting.
Across the board in politics, from parties?
Yeah, across the board from parties. We had, out of 36 respondents, there were 2 that didn't support some sort of school choice. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
And same thing on ethics. There was universal support for ethics. Who can be opposed to that, right?
Yeah.
There's a couple of the sticking points were an ethics commission because of the size. No one wants to add more bureaucracy to state government, right? That's not. And there's a cost associated with that, but you can mitigate it. And there's a lot of states that do this. Again, we're one of 3 states that doesn't have an ethics commission of some sort.
That surprises me. I don't know why that alone shouldn't make us move this forward.
Exactly.
How you can oppose it is maybe this year.
Yeah.
So I think yesterday you sent out an announcement that I got, and it was titled Vision for Vermont, which I thought was an incredible read. Could you talk a little bit about that document and what you're hoping to achieve?
Yeah, so we're really excited about it. This has been, I came on board as executive director at the beginning of October, and I've really dived into, there's a lot of feeling with the board of directors and other people that we needed to move the organization forward, and that we had to come up with organize our thoughts around what we're trying to achieve, what we're trying to accomplish, and what our vision for what Vermont can become. And that's what we released on Friday. And it's basically, 4 things that we've identified as goals for, not just for our organization, but also for the state. So creating a prosperous environment for all Vermonters from all areas of the state, all walks of life, an environment where anyone can succeed, right, basically is what we're looking for. There's also, things like transparency and accountability in government, access to voting, making sure that people are getting engaged, because there's nothing that's more productive in a democracy than engaged electorate, right? You need to have an engaged and active electorate to make any sort of progress. And so there's a number of things that we laid out as goals, and we backed them up. So it wasn't just, one sentence and then and keep it vague, right? There's a whole 2 or 3 paragraphs on each point that we make, each goal that we set.
For the issue.
It sets the framework. For example, we look at the median household income in Vermont is about 2% above the national average, which is good. I mean, we're glad that we're above the national average and we're doing okay in that metric. But then you look at cost of living, and we're 12% above the national average. And there's, Vermont's a northern state. We don't have a seaport.
Right.
There's some inherent. It's going to be a more expensive state to live in. Right. But to have such a large gap between where our median household income is and where our cost of living is compared to the nation as a whole, there's clearly some progress that we need to make to try to close that gap.
Well, that's great. I wish you a lot of luck, which brings us to our announcement, I think. For those of you who have been watching the show, I started this show after I unsuccessfully ran for the Senate. But I did a 15-minute thing here at Orca, and they asked me afterwards to do a show. And because I didn't realize how disengaged people were to what's going on in Montpelier, and yet we all feel the effects of the taxes and education. And I was hoping that through this show I could bring you issues and have great guests on who will explain the details, not to put any political spin on it, but just to give you the information so that you can make your decisions about what you want to do and hopefully get up and vote. Because I think, what is the average? About 43% over the years. It's pretty depressing.
It's pretty low, especially in non-presidential years.
Right.
This year we actually surprisingly had a pretty high turnout.
Well, I think it's so. It was quite emotional on the national level. But so I reached out to Campaign Vermont because of my prior experience and because I've been watching what they were doing, and I was hoping to join with them to sort of broaden our horizons and broaden our audience. So maybe you could take it from there, because you said yes.
So we're very excited, to work together to broaden, the reach of our message. Essentially, is what this is. We're going to work together on creating content, for the show, and we're in Montpelier. We're in the statehouse during the legislative session, so we'll be able to bring some information there, help to organize guests, help to create the questions that you ask candidates, and hopefully, again, it goes back to creating a more engaged and active electorate, which is one of the goals that we've set forward as an organization. So it's a great opportunity. We have a network of about 20,000 people across the state, so it gives the show an area to plug into to broaden reach on social media and the network that we've built. And it also gives us another tool to communicate with voters and with supporters. So.
Well, I'm excited because I think we also were talking about writing articles for the weekly newspapers around the state. I used to do it when I was in the House of Representatives. I got amazing feedback. People really they don't even know where to look for the information. And sadly, our newspapers aren't covering what's going on in the State House quite as in detail as they used to. So we're going to be writing articles. We're going to do an hour format instead of a half hour. We're going to start January 2nd, I think, is the first Monday, right?
Yeah, January 2nd, first Monday, will be right before the legislature kicks off, so we'll be ready to go. And the other thing we're planning to do is a website expansion so that we can get more of the video content up on the website, and we can use it as a platform to share on social media and share with our network. So we're really excited about that.
And we're going to focus on the things we've pretty much been focusing on: the property tax, the budget, education, and all the things that you are interested in. My latest one is the Lake Champlain cleanup, which every time I hear about that
it's a really difficult issue to solve. I sat down with some people earlier in the year talking about this is an issue, and it's not an easy one to solve.
No,
it really isn't.
Because I thought when I left the legislature, they had passed a bill to clean up Lake Champlain. Then when I ran for the Senate, I found out, well, we haven't done that.
Well, because they passed a bill and they didn't fund it.
Well, I think I think the economy went in the tank and they didn't have the money. But things like, I had Bill Sayer on a couple of weeks ago who talked about our forestry industry is in crisis. I mean, there's so much to cover. You need to know this stuff, what's going on. It's really scary.
It really is. I mean, Vermont has largely figured out how to be good stewards of our forests as a whole. That doesn't necessarily mean our market for forest products is healthy. People don't realize how large of an impact Lake Champlain has on the economy. It's a huge economic driver.
Tourism alone is just amazing.
Yeah, and we've pumped enough phosphorus into certain parts of the lake at this point. It could take 20 years to recover. And so it's really we need to seriously sit down and take a look at what we're doing and what we can do differently to make sure that we're protecting things like Lake Champlain and Memphremagog and other smaller lakes around the state that are in crisis.
Right. Yeah. No, I can't agree with you more. I would hope that you would contact either Ben or I to tell us what you'd like to hear about, because we're open. It's a new administration. Phil Scott will be starting in January, and I'd like you to get to know the people that he's bringing in and what his agenda is and his priorities, and we'll be talking about that. Bringing in legislators. We're going to have a new, there's so many people that have left.
There's a lot of new people.
New Speaker of the House, a new Senate Pro Tem.
New Senate Pro Tem, new Lieutenant Governor, new Majority Leader.
Right.
We're going to have a new Majority Leader in the Senate and the House, and a new Minority Leader in the Senate. It's almost a total change of leadership.
Wow.
So there's a lot of new faces.
Yeah, a lot of history lost too, just knowledge of the process.
Some of the older, some of the older institutional candidates that are no longer in the mix.
I was approached by a new legislator asked to be on the show, and I thought how cool it would be to interview him. He's coming up. Who knows what he's thinking, that he's expecting to see, and if it meets his expectations, and what surprises you up there. So that might be an interesting show. But I also want to let you know when there's public hearings, and maybe how to look up bills in the legislative bill tracking system, because it's not as complicated as it looks, and it would be very interesting for you to know who's voting for what bills, because that's one thing I was very surprised at when I went door knocking. People really, they like a legislator, but they have no idea how they vote.
Yeah,
and I think that's important when you're voting.
It is, and it's really, they've done a lot of great work on the legislative website the last few years. It's come a really long way. You can now see things like, you can pull up a profile for your legislator, see all their contact info, their bio there. You can see what bills they introduced, what bills they voted on. You can see all of that right from a legislator's profile on the legislative website, which is much better than it used to be.
It's really not that difficult to navigate around either. And so we may do a show on that. I tried unsuccessfully when I first started the show. I think we may need to get some help. Maybe you're probably a little younger than I. You could do it. It's just sitting down and helping people get through it.
Yeah, it's really not that complicated. It's all, search engine based, so it's not difficult to find something as long as you know what you're looking for.
Great. Well, I'm very excited, and I hope you are too. I hope you will contact Ben and I. And it's a pleasure doing business with you.
Well, thank you very much.
Excellent.
We're looking forward to it.
So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week. And in the meantime, keep listening beyond the sound bites and stay tuned for the new format. See you. Thank you.